Hey, I've got some horrifying stories from Reddit for you. Strange, unsettling ones that might stick with you longer than you think. If you're into that kind of thing, consider subscribing. Let's get into it. Still creeps me out every time I think of it. A few years ago, fall or early winter of 2019, we were staying with my husband's father. We moved into a house a couple of months later, but had been staying there less than a week at the time this happened. I slept in the living room on an air mattress with our kids ages 10, 5, and 1. The kitchen, dining room, and living room were all open space. There was a wide counter and sink that was a bar on the living room side. He never had stools or used it like that though. Always had a sofa pushed right up to it and had storage for dishes and whatever in the kitchen side. On each end of that counter, there was about 4 or 5 feet of open space between it and the wall. Along the wall, directly opposite the front door, were 3 doors: father-in-law's bedroom, bathroom, spare room, from left to right. My husband slept on the tiny spare bed. His dad kept the door to his room closed and usually had a TV and either a space heater, window AC unit, or at least one fan going. I don't remember if my husband had the door to the room he was sleeping in open or closed that night. Except for that back wall, where the bedrooms and bathroom were, the house had windows all the way around it. Large floor-to-ceiling windows along the front and a line of large, sliding windows along each side wall. It was originally built as a sort of camp getaway cabin. Windows equals view. Apparently, he disagreed and was in the process of building a front porch and replacing about half of those windows with wall. However, at the time, the porch was still being built and none of the windows had been changed or taken out yet. This particular night, I was holding my 18-month-old with a child on each side of us. We had all been asleep for a while when I woke up. I'm not sure what time it was, but the house was mostly quiet and no one else was awake. I lay there quietly without moving around for a little while and couldn't figure out why I was awake at all, much less so alert. Not long after I decided it was just one of those things, sleep cycles, blah blah blah, and was about to try to go back to sleep, someone knocked on the front door. Not a loud, banging, beating knock, but definitely a knock. The air mattress was in the middle of the living room area, and the door was on the kitchen side of that dividing counter. I really didn't want to answer the door for multiple reasons. Was in the middle of 3 sleeping children. It was late, it was cold, and we were cozy and warm, all snuggled together. It wasn't my house company, and no one else seemed to notice someone was knocking. The knocking went on for longer than I would have knocked on someone's door in the middle of the night, and did get more persistent, though never did turn into banging. No one called out for somebody to answer the door, and no one's cell rang. Finally, I heard someone walking down the unfinished porch. They had stacked some boards and tools and stuff against the front of the house. I heard no clatters or thumps or anything like that, but it did sound like whoever was out there was having to walk on and around those building materials. And then I heard a distinct and firm tapping on the window closest to the kids and me. There was a small, older TV and a small stereo speakers sitting on 2 small tables, about nightstand size. Actually, the one holding the TV was an old nightstand I had given him years before between the air mattress and the windows. I was facing away from the window, but the tapping was right there where our heads were. An entire wall of floor-to-ceiling windows. And the tapping was done only in the area that would have been in my direct line of sight if I hadn't been facing the other direction. I don't think I took a single breath until it stopped and I heard footsteps walking away. And they walked across tin, all the way to the end of the porch where the driveway was. Walking across sheets of tin makes a pretty distinct sound. I know exactly what it sounds like when someone walks on tin. What I did not realize until the next morning was that the only sheets of tin out there were already in place, because they had finished putting it up as a roof over the porch before stopping for the evening, which meant that there were no sheets of tin stored against the wall under the windows, with those boards and tools and whatever else that was there. The only way for someone or something to have walked across those sheets of tin, which I am certain, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that I heard happening after hearing an unknown someone knock and tap for so long it became unsettling rather than annoying, would have been for them to swing up onto the top of the house porch from an incomplete porch floor and then jump back down at the end. It scares me in a way nothing else ever has, and still does every single time I accidentally think about it. And that's why I'm typing this right now. And probably also why an owl chose just now to let loose the most terrifying, un-owl-like sound before transitioning into its usual eerie owl sounds. True EMS horror story. I worked as a dispatcher for a pretty small ambulance station near a fairly large city in the middle of the US. I'm not sure how specific I can be since this is a true story, and I'm going to tell one of the craziest stories I have from this job. We had a patient who we'll call Susan. She was a dialysis patient, and one of the services we offered was to take very unwell or disabled patients to and from their dialysis appointments. She lived with her son, David. He was in his late 40s, and his mother, Susan, was in her late 70s or so. Every week, like clockwork, we would have a unit bring Susan to and from her dialysis treatments 3 times a week. Everyone knew her at the station because we had been doing this for quite some time. We were all familiar with her and her son, whether it was the crew seeing her in person and taking care of her, or speaking to her or her son on the phone frequently about the appointments, as I had done. Naturally, when crews had news about her health, they would report back to keep everyone in the loop. At one point, she was not feeling well at all, but she still wanted to go to her dialysis appointment, so we obliged and took her in. During that appointment, while receiving treatment, she lost consciousness and was promptly taken by our crew to the hospital. When it was time again for her next dialysis appointment, we called the hospital to see if she had been released and was able to attend. The hospital staff informed us that she would likely be released the following day and would be receiving that dialysis treatment in the hospital. When the next treatment time rolled around, we called again and were told she had been released from their care the day before. This was great news, but a little strange, since we were always her first call to transport her anywhere, and we hadn't taken her home. We quickly moved on and called David to see if she was going to be needing transport that day. He told us she wasn't feeling well and that she wasn't up to it, but that he was considering taking her back to the hospital. We told him that if he needed us to just give us a call, and until further notice, we canceled her trip for the day. We never got a call. The next appointment rolled around, and we called David again to ask if she would be going. He said she was sick and that she was back in the hospital. That was odd again, since we hadn't taken her, but it didn't seem too off considering her declining health. Next appointment, same story. We called David. He said his mom was in the hospital, and we moved on. Now is where things took a turn. When the next appointment came up, we tried calling David again to ask about his mother's status, but he never answered or returned our calls. Since we had a contract with Susan to take her to these appointments, unless told otherwise, we sent a crew to collect her for treatment. When the crew arrived, they knocked on the door and got no response. They knocked again and were finally greeted by David, who was smoking a cigarette. He seemed surprised. The crew said they were there to pick up Susan for her appointment. David replied that he had forgotten to call, but that Susan was still in the hospital and not doing well. The crew gave their best wishes, and David shut the door. But something felt off. They immediately radioed dispatch to say something wasn't right and asked us to call the hospital David said she was at to verify. The hospital had no record of her being there since the last time we had checked. We had the crew leave the scene and called for a welfare check on Susan at her son's home. We heard nothing the rest of the day, no word from police, David, or anyone else involved. The next morning, I came into work, and the very first call I took began with, "This is Sheriff. I'm calling to report back on the welfare check you asked us to perform yesterday." I was nervous because he sounded concerned, and I didn't expect them to call back with any news. He proceeded to tell me that when officers arrived at the home, they spoke with David, who was adamant that his mother didn't feel well, but that she was home from the hospital. The police asked to check on Susan just to make sure she was all right, and eventually David obliged, letting them in. Once inside, they were met with a grim scene, though I imagine they smelled it first. The officers found the dead body of Susan propped up on the couch, wrapped in blankets as if watching television. But she had been dead for around 2 weeks. When speaking to David, they discovered he had been changing her clothes regularly and watching TV with her. Obviously, he was suffering from some kind of mental issue and grief, but the thing was, he had never taken good care of her until she was dead. No news coverage, no updates from police, nothing. Stuff like this happens in your own town and you'll never even know. Crazy, right? Hoofy, a true story, a native inmate told me. This is an old story told to me from a few years ago. I was just reminded of it a couple days back when retelling it, and I'm curious if anyone else has ever heard of this, or if it was made up by the person who told me it. I used to work at a maximum security prison where I was in charge of overseeing the production of food. Not a co by any means, and I was able to talk to the inmates very frequently. One early morning, I was doing paperwork when one of the inmates was doing some sort of stalking, and we were talking about urban legends. This man was Native American, I think Navajo, but I could be wrong. He will be dubbed Storm for the same of this story, and Storm told me about a legend, and an experience he had on his reserve about some sort of devil, a devil called Hoofy. He claims there is this handsome man with a tall white cowboy hat and boots that frequently goes into casinos. He doesn't gamble. He flirts with beautiful young women and lures them out of the casino. Once he takes these women to his home, he transforms into this tall creature with shaggy goat legs and long black hair. His beautiful face turned into a mix of a demotic horse and a wolf with piercing red eyes. He devours these women and leaves their clothing around his homestead as a memento of his killings. I laughed because it sounded like a typical monster, but Storm gets serious and then tells me that he had a close encounter with Hoofy and he barely made it out alive. Storm and his cousin lived in an Arizona reservation on the other side of South Mountain, very close to my hometown in Estrella Mountain. One day, he and his cousin were drinking and trying to pass the time as there wasn't much to do. They decided to take a walk into the desert, just for the hell of it. Not much else to do anyways. It was about half an hour or so from sundown, so the two tread off in a direction and enjoy the scenery of the plain desert. They walk for about 15 minutes or so when they come across this abandoned church-like building. It was old and decrepit, with weak wooden structures that looked as though a stiff wind could break down the church. The two walked through the church and out the back, walking through broken pews and the floor creaking with each step. They laughed about how freaky and weird this old building was before slowly making their way out. They walk out the door and jump over a trench just past the back end of the church. The pair continued to walk and laugh when they came across something strange. Storm says that he saw a wide arrangement of shoes, mudded red high heels, black flats, torn brown pumps, an assortment of women's shoes scattered around them that were broken and dirty, clearly abandoned for some time. Storm picked up a shoe to inspect it when he turned to his cousin. The look on his cousin's face was that of complete and utter horror. His face was pale and his eyes were wide, close to tearing, and he was looking behind Storm. Storm was about to turn around when his cousin stopped him. "No," he whispers, placing his hands on Storm's shoulder. "Don't look up. Keep your head down, man." Frightened, Storm follows his cousin's words. He had never seen his cousin so freaked out. Then he heard it, a pair of heavy footsteps walking behind him. The sound of labored breathing matching with the steps, and Storm feels as though his whole body felt 10 degrees colder. His shoulders were shaking when his cousin pulled his hand and stepped back slowly. "We need to go." His voice was nearly lost in the heavy steps behind him, but Storm heard him just barely. "Whatever you do, don't look back," was the last thing his cousin told him before he booked it. The pair ran as fast as they could, sprinting past the old church and running to their homestead. His cousin yelled out native prayers in hopes that some sort of ancestral guardian could stop this beast. All the while Storm could hear the galloping of hooves behind them, the feeling of the creatures breathing against the back of his neck. Hot and sticky breath smelling of rotten flesh, motivating him to keep running no matter how tired he got. For he knew he would be his creature's next meal if he slowed down one bit. They ran, cutting the time back to their home in half. They safely did make it back inside their home just as the sun was setting, bathing their home in a warm orange glow. Panting against the wall, Storm placed a hand over his fast-beating heart. Scared of what he might see, but he had to know, Storm stumbled to an outside window and pulled back a blind, peering out into the dusking landscape. In the direction that they came from, Storm could see the back of the creature walking away. 8-foot-tall being with long, silky black hair that reached its waist. Where human legs should be, instead was a pair of long goat-like legs with black stamping hooves that kicked up dust as it walked away. Home alone with my old dog. Although it doesn't seem like it, this happened quite a while back, probably over 10 years ago. I was in the later years of high school and was home alone. My parents were at a wedding that required them to stay at a hotel, and my brother worked the night shift. At that time, my family lived in a very well-known East Coast city in a blue-collar neighborhood that was starting to take a nosedive. As a teenager, I was a bit of a loner. I wasn't a nerd or anything. I was a big dude who had friends and went on dates, but I'm a natural introvert, so I cherished the rare alone time that I got. This weekend, I was looking forward to engaging in my normal empty house routine. Play some PlayStation on the big screen TV, then order a late takeout dinner, pizza or Chinese, and pig out while watching some Dragon Ball Z. Then around 2 a.m., fall asleep on the couch with my old dog, Cecil. Cecil was a beagle who was as old as the hills and had been in our family for about 8 years. He was quiet and peaceful and spent his time begging for food and sleeping. Unlike most beagles, Cecil never howled or barked. He was more than content to rest his head on your lap and spend the night there. Anyway, back to the story. It's approximately 1 a.m. I had just finished the last slice of pizza and was dozing off on the couch when I hear a bang coming from the back alleyway. I didn't think much of it. Anyone who has lived in a city knows noises happen at all moments of the night. Cecil's head popped up off my lap and the hair on his back stood up. He was always a bit skittish, so I calmed him down and started dozing off again. Not more than 2 minutes later, I hear another bang, and Cecil did something I never seen him do before. He leapt off the couch and ran like the wind towards the door leading to the basement, barking and growling like a dog twice his size. The look on his face reminded me of German Shepherd K-9 unit. I'd never seen him like that before, which got my adrenaline pumping. Through the dog's barking, I can now make out a persistent banging. There was a seldom used door in the basement that led to our back alleyway. It was old and rusted and was hard to open, even with a key, and it made a lot of noise. I suddenly realized that someone was trying to break into my house through my basement door. Quick little bit of context for anyone who hasn't lived in a bad neighborhood. If someone tries to get into your house and moves on after they realize the door is locked, they want your stuff. If someone is persistently trying to get into your house despite the door being locked, well, they want you. Knowing this, I rush upstairs to grab the heavy wood baseball bat that I keep under my bed for situations like this. Then, I head down my basement. I probably should have ran, but I was a macho teenager with a tough guy complex, and plus, I had nowhere to go. While I'm heading down the stairs to my basement, Cecil blows past me with the speed and aggression of a dog half his age. Suddenly, I hear a man's voice say, "OFCK," and the banging stopped. I didn't call the cops or anyone else, which was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. I just sat up for the rest of the night with a bat in hand. My brother came home that morning, and I told him what had happened. We went to the basement door to take a look, and when we gave it a tug to open it, the whole door fell off. This psycho was one good shove away from getting in my house, but old Cecil scared him off. I'm pretty sure that lazy, fat old dog saved my life. When I tell this story to people, they dismiss his actions as a dog doing what a dog was supposed to do. But when I tell you that Cecil never barked or moved that fast in his life, you can take that to the bank. It was almost like he knew the urgency, like he knew that door was gonna give. A few years back, we had to have him put down cause he just had no will to live anymore. Before the injection, I got a moment alone with him. I thanked him one last time for his friendship and for what he did that night. At this point, I was a grown man with a wife and kids. I'm convinced none of that would have happened without old Cecil. Thanks, pal. I miss ya. My horror story as a tow truck driver. I was a RTTO, registered tow truck operator, for about 2 years. It was a great job, pay was good, lots of overtime and on-call shifts. I got into the career because of shows I watched as a kid like Highway Through Hell. So, when I got the chance to go into the field, I jumped on it. The first month was good. I learned a lot of experience and new skills. Part of our job as RTTO was emergency calls with police and fire for crash scenes and impounds. So, we saw a lot of tragic stuff, DUI fatalities, hit and runs, non-DUI fatalities, etc. The job can be very emotionally and mentally draining and can mess you up if you're not careful. However, there's another kind of aspect to the job not a lot of drivers talk about. The paranormal, odd stuff, or calls that unsettle you. Almost every tow truck driver has experienced it. It was a snowy, cold November night in 2023. We didn't get a lot of calls that day, so I was just chilling at the shop for my on-call shift. The night was going very slowly. We hadn't gotten any calls for hours. So I lay down for a bit, not expecting to get any call for the night. Then all of a sudden, I get a call for a broken down WSB, Washington State Patrol, car off this dirt road. I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't too weird for me since I have gotten a few calls like it before. So, I hop in my flatbed and drive up to the call's location. The directions took me a good 30-ish minutes outside of the city to the mountains on a -90. By the time I get off the freeway, it was super foggy and very hard to see. So I took it slow and easy to be safe. I keep driving up the now dirt mountain road, and then I start thinking to myself that this is a really odd road for WSP to be on since they usually stay on the interstates and state highways. I didn't think much of it when I first got the call, because staters and sheriffs do occasionally go out on the more remote roads. But the road I was going on was an unpaved, dirt logging road. There was nothing out here, just an old logging road and trees. I tried to rationalize it to myself that maybe the cop was just out here for an abandoned car, which would explain why he is all the way out here, since cars do get left and abandoned out here often. So I just shrug it off and continue my way up the road. I finally get to the location and stop the truck dead in its tracks and just sit there for a minute. What the hell, I think to myself. The WSB car was parked out on this mountain road with all its doors open and no lights on, with no officers in sight. It was so foggy I really could only see the car, but it was clear to me that no one was in sight. I very heavily contemplated just turning around and going back. But I eventually decided to hop out and inspect the car and look for the officer, since he could have been injured after all. So I hopped out of the truck and grabbed my AR with my sidearm holstered, since I had no idea what I was about to walk into. I walked up to the car very cautiously. Just because I had my guns on did not make the situation feel any better nor safer. I first checked out the driver's seat, then the passenger seat. Odd, I think to myself, nothing is missing. It was like everything was frozen in time. At this point, I'm starting to get a strange feeling like something is off. That's when I look into the trunk of the car and notice the AR is missing. I immediately freeze up and look around. As I'm looking around, that's when I notice that the forest was dead quiet. No wind, no nothing. I have seen a lot of messed up stuff, dead bodies, entire families killed in one accident, etc., but I was completely unnerved. Something inside me was telling me to get the hell out of there. I managed to gather the composure to do a walk around one more time, just to make sure I didn't miss anything. Then I called my dispatcher, just to make sure I had the right location and information, and sure enough, everything was correct. At that point, I was ready as hell to get out as fast as possible. Right before I turned the truck around, I yelled out just to see if I'd get a response, but nothing but dead silence came back. Something is deeply wrong with this, I said to myself, and booked it out of there. The whole drive back, I had this sick feeling like I stumbled across something I was absolutely not supposed to see, or if I was even supposed to be there. I keep thinking why the cop was all the way out there, why he left the car, or why all the doors were wide open, or if it was even a cop in the first place. More or less, why only the AR was missing when thousands of dollars worth of equipment was in that car. Once I got back to the shop, I called the police dispatcher that gave us the call. Since I knew her, I was hoping she could give some answers. But no, she said the exact same thing that was said to me, that a WSB car was broken down and just needed a tow. I never told my supervisor or anyone else out of fear that they wouldn't believe me. I mean, I wouldn't if I were them. I never heard anything about a missing cop after that. Nothing on the news, just nothing. It still creeps me out to this day thinking about it. Camping incident last year. So me and my best friend try to go camping once a year. We have been doing this since we were 13 years old. Never really been truly scared or had anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season the first night and space was very limited. We were losing light, so we set up camp on a spot on the side of the mountain that was an absolute wind tunnel. Morning came, so we went into town, drank beers, and dicked around until late afternoon. By the time we got back up to the mountains to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again, but managed to find a more remote spot. We get set up with our tents, get the fire going, and start drinking again. Time goes by, it's probably 1 a.m. when we see a flashlight aimed at us. And then it starts walking our way. We don't really think much of it, and assume it's likely a park ranger coming to fuss at us about something, because who else walks up on you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m.? I don't know about you, but ever since I started camping, I learned it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night unless it's an emergency. Anyways, the person gets close enough, and we realize it's just some guy, probably early 50s, in a shirt and basketball shorts, and his girl 40s who is avoiding eye contact with us. The man immediately forces a conversation about nothing, doesn't acknowledge the time or his girl. His eyes were darting all over the place while we're talking to him about dumb shit, like what model or style of lantern we had and how cool it was. He's saying weird stuff, like how he used to be former law enforcement, completely out of context of the random conversation he engaged us in, when all of a sudden he pretends to land his flashlight on our tents and says, "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup." The way his eyes and flashlight are moving gives us both the feeling that he's trying to see how many of us were there and what we had on us or near us, because his eyes and flashlight kept scanning the ground around us. We were getting sized up for what I don't know. Once this guy sees everything around us, he kind of pauses for a minute, ends the conversation, and walks off into the woods. Once his flashlight disappears, me and my friend look at each other, and without me saying anything, he looks at me and says, "We're packing our shit and getting out of here." So we did. This was the most unsettling thing I have ever had happen while camping. I think this guy was going to wait until we were asleep and come back. I just don't know for what, but I do know we were 100% getting sized up that night. Might not seem like much, but if you have ever had a moment with another human being who was sizing you up, y'all know what I am talking about. I was shocked when I found out that I hadn't dreamed it. A few days ago, I was sitting with my parents in their house. Suddenly, the topic turned to paranormal things because recently, something strange has been happening to my mother. My mother began reminding my father of the time when we were walking to my grandmother's house one evening, my father, mother, sister, and me. I was the youngest then, only 6 years old. A woman dressed in white, holding a bowl in her hands, appeared in front of the four of us. We all froze in that moment. The woman in her white dress was floating in the air, and her legs weren't visible beneath the dress. She quickly turned toward the wheat field beside us, and we could see the waves in the wheat as she moved through it. My father began to follow her, while we, in my mother's arms, waited to see what would happen. Beyond the wheat field was a river. My father reached the river, but the woman was nowhere to be seen. She couldn't have crossed the river, so where did she disappear? My father returned, pale, looked at my mother, and simply told us to keep walking. While my mother was telling this story, I jumped out of my chair and said that I had always thought I had dreamed it, and that this dream had haunted me for years, because I still remember it as clearly as day. My mother said that it really did happen, and from that day, she no longer looked at the world the same way. My father was as pale as he was that day, terrified by the mere thought of the event. I met someone at work who didn't seem human. I'm 16 and I work at the local grocery store. I've had the job for about a year now. Since I'm still in high school, I don't work during the day. I usually get scheduled for 3 weekday shifts, mostly closing from 6 to 10. This past Wednesday seemed like a normal night. It was around 9, maybe 9:30, and I was just waiting for my shift to end. I was up near the front of the store, restocking cans, when I noticed a man walk in. I'm not great at guessing ages, but he looked like he was around 40. He was average height, maybe 5, and had this really pale skin, like he hadn't been outside in a long time. His clothes didn't look dirty or anything, but they felt off. Almost like they didn't fit quite right, like he had put on someone else's outfit. It was a plain gray hoodie and black jeans, but the hoodie sat too tight around the neck and the sleeves were too short. What caught my attention was the way he moved. He looked stiff, like inhumanly stiff. He was walking as if he didn't have any joints, just kind of rigid and unnatural. His arms hung straight at his sides, barely swinging, and his feet hit the floor hard with every step. It creeped me out a little, but I ignored it and kept working. A few minutes later, I finished, and my manager told me to restock some more things near the back of the store. So I grabbed the cart and headed back. And then the man appeared again. Same strange walk. He looked like he was searching for something but had no idea what it was. When he noticed me, he walked over and asked where the soda was. His voice was haunting, cold and flat, like there was no emotion behind it. It made me feel uneasy. Up close, his face looked wrong. Not scary, just wrong. His skin was smooth in a way that didn't look natural, almost plastic. His eyes were sunken, but not in a tired way, they just looked hollow. And the weirdest part was how he blinked. It was slow, like someone acting out what blinking is supposed to look like. I told him what aisle it was in, and then he did something that really freaked me out. He repeated my exact sentence word for word, then said thank you. That might not sound super weird, but in the moment, it felt off. I finished up and went back to my manager. I looked around for the guy, but I couldn't find him anywhere. He must have left. I asked my manager if she'd seen him, but she said no. I asked the cashier later, and he said she had noticed his weird walk, but he hadn't bought anything. I went home and tried to forget about it, but I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about his face. It was uncanny, like a copy of a real person. It just didn't feel right. It's been a few days, and I still can't get his face, or the way he walked, out of my head. I'm a graffiti artist. This has never happened before. I'm a graffiti artist. Before you judge me and say I'm a bad person or whatever, hear me out. I work on pieces in my city, Birmingham in the United Kingdom. This happened a few weeks back. In the east side of the city, there is a canal that runs through the city, which is naturally full of tags and graffiti pieces as it's a pretty quiet spot. But certain parts of it are visible to the public. It isn't easy to get down into the canal, but me and my friend, who's also into graffiti art, stumbled across a hidden ladder in a run-down car park on the back streets of the east side. We climbed down and realized we could walk the whole length of the canals. The water was pretty high up on this day, so we had to be careful. After about 30 minutes, we had painted over old, ruined pieces of graffiti, created new tags, and just generally had a good time. That's when we noticed the man standing on the other side of the water. At first, we were startled, throwing our cans back into my backpack and getting ready to run, as though we were about to get caught. However, the man just stood there. For a long while, I stood watching him as he stared lifelessly at us. It was pretty unnerving. The guy had to be about 40 years old with gray hair, but he was standing so abnormally, his legs parted evenly, and his arms parted from his body at his sides. He didn't move, he just stared. I looked at my friend, who I'll call Josh for this story, and he looked back at me by the looks, unnerved. He decided to shout, "Hey," at the man, and then, "You all right, buddy?" At first I thought this was a bad idea, but I just let it happen to see the man's reaction. Nothing. He just stood there like a mannequin. We were pretty shaken up, but we just said to walk further along the canal and continue painting. About an hour later, we'd pretty much forgotten about the whole thing. We was now down to our last 2 cans of paint, so we was about to call it a day, when I stepped back to see what we'd created. Just then I noticed the same man from before, standing in the middle of the dirty canal, just staring lifelessly at us. I was so surprised to see him that I dropped my can into the canal and turned to face Josh. He noticed the man too. The man took the first step we'd seen him take all day towards us. We dropped the cans and sprinted across the path back to the ladder. We pretty much ran all the way back to the city center where we caught our breath and tried to figure out what the hell we'd just experienced. If any of these stories got under your skin, let me know in the comments. And if you want more strange and unsettling stories, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, stay curious and maybe keep a light on.